So now that we've downloaded jQuery and saved it to our hard drive, we're going to create a simple jQuery enabled page. And for the first jQuery example, we're going to keep things pretty simple. So our example page is going to do three things. It's going to include a reference to the jQuery library that we just downloaded. And then we're going to write an event handler. And that event handler is going to respond to the page loading up in the browser window. And it will display an alert that indicates that the event handler was in fact called and jQuery is therefore working and doing its thing. So before we do that, let's take a look at how you would do this without jQuery. Typically, code that you want to have executed when the page is loaded is written something like what you see here. So what I've done is write a run on load function, and that displays an alert, and you can see I'm triggering that off the window.onload event. Now, the problem with this is that the Windows onload event only fires after all of the page content has been downloaded, including any images that you have in the page. It's also a lot harder to add multiple independent onload functions because if you want to have more than one function run on the window onload event, you have to cram them all into this one function here, or you have to use the DOM event model to do that, which is different among browsers. Now, jQuery provides a way to run the code when the DOM of the page is actually ready, regardless of whether all of the content, such as images, has been downloaded. And that's called the document.ready event. And it also makes it a lot easier to write modular independent onload functions, and jQuery will just chain them together. So let's see how to do this the jQuery way. To do this in jQuery, you write a document.ready event handler, and it's written like the code you see here. So this little $ character, that's the jQuery object. And you can write the $, you can write jQuery and call functions off of that. However, most of the jQuery code you'll probably see in practice is written using this $ character right here. And that's where all of jQuery's functionality is accessed from. So what I'm doing here is writing the jQuery object and calling the function with the parameter of document and then .ready. And I'm passing it this anonymous function that will display an alert when the page is loaded. Now, if you're not familiar with anonymous functions, I covered this subject in my course titled Practical and Effective JavaScript, which is also available here on lynda.com. So you might want to check out that title to learn a little bit more about anonymous functions. However, you can also just do this the old-fashioned way. You can write an independent function, give it a name, and then pass the name of that function here. I'm just doing it this way because it's a bit more succinct and concise to do it this way. So this function calls an alert, says, hey, the page just loaded. Now, this code will now execute when the DOM of the page has loaded and is ready for use rather than just waiting for all the page content to finish downloading. And as I said before, another advantage of this approach is that you can call this document.ready function multiple times with individual functions that you want executed, and jQuery will just chain each one together to be called in succession. So that allows you to write much more modular code to run when the page gets loaded, and they can be contained within separate JavaScript files and so on. Okay, so now that we've seen what we're going to do, let's jump over to the code and do that. If you have access to the exercise files, this is the folder they're contained in, and you can see that what I've done is I've taken the jQuery file that we downloaded and placed it at the root of the exercise files because all of these guys are going to be using this file right here. And this is that Visual Studio documentation file that I talked about earlier. You don't need to download this if you're not using it. I just happen to be using it, so I put it at the same level as the jQuery file. So let's go into the folder for this chapter, and you'll see a couple of example files. This one here is called first jQuery page _ start, and that's the beginning of this lesson. If you'd like, you can go ahead and jump ahead to look at the finished version to see how the code looks and run it in your browser, or you can just follow along with me as we edit the file. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my code editor. So here we are in my editor, and I happen to be using a free version of Visual Web Developer 2008 Express, and you can freely download that from Microsoft if you're running on Windows, but there's a bunch of other tools you can use. It doesn't really matter which text editor you're using as long as you're comfortable with it. So what I'm going to do is insert a script reference to the jQuery library. So I'm going to go ahead and type script. and the type is JavaScript, and the source is equal to, I'm just going to type the little relative URL back up to that jQuery library, which is located up at the root level. So that's jQuery-1.3.2.js. Now, at the time I'm recording this, 1.3.2 is the most current version, but you might have a later version. So that's all I need to do there. Okay, so now I've included the jQuery library. So now what I need to do is write the script code. So I'm going to write another script tag down here. And this one's going to be inline, so I'm just going to type equals text JavaScript. And now I'm going to write the $, that's the jQuery object. And I'm going to call the document keyword .ready. And I'm going to pass that a function. Okay. And inside the function, I'm going to say alert. The page just loaded. Okay, so now I'm ready to preview this in the browser. And again, depending on the tool you're using, this will be different for you. Or you can just go out to the file system and load the page up in the browser. But I'm going to do it from right here. I'm just going to choose View in Browser. And you can see that the page comes up. And sure enough, the alert shows up, says, hey, the page just loaded. So that's what happens in IE. Let's go back and take a look at what happens in Firefox. Okay, so here I am going to go back up and choose Browse With. And I've got Firefox right there. I'll say Browse. And you can see that there's Firefox. And the same thing happens. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to do to write your first jQuery-enabled page. You can see that what we did was we included a script reference to the library and wrote a simple function that executes on page loads. And now we're ready to get into detailed, involved jQuery coding.